What's up, everybody? Welcome to whatever this is, my channel. If you're new here, my name is James. This channel is random. I talk about code, WordPress, freelancing, branding, marketing, all sorts of things. Today, I will be talking about WordPress. WordPress is the most popular website builder. People don't like calling it that. It's a content management system. But it's a method for building a website. And something like 40% of all websites in the world use WordPress, which is kind of nuts. Second place is like 1.5% or something crazy. So they're absolutely dominating the market. And there's some reasons for that I'm not really going to go into. But what I do want to talk about is how WordPress works, especially if you are like me and you're coming from a static web development background. Static meaning basically HTML, maybe some CSS, some JavaScript. That's how I learned 100 years ago. I learned HTML, eventually got around to learning CSS, JavaScript. And so that's how I understood web design to work. You create an index.html file, you create a about.html file, a contact.html, whatever pages you want to create, you have to go in and create those files, HTML, and code them out, right? That's a static website. Static meaning it doesn't change without you going in and actually changing the code, right? That's the only way to update content on a static website is to actually go in and change the code. A dynamic website is something like a blog, where you are actually using some kind of dashboard to update content. And then oftentimes a lot of things kind of happen automatically. For instance, if you add a new blog post, not only does that blog post get added to the main blog page, but there might also be some sidebars on your website that has some lists of categories of blog posts, and those automatically get updated when you add a new post. You don't have to go in and do that. So that's a dynamic website where you can make changes to the content without having to go in and actually edit the code. And WordPress is a dynamic website building platform, and dynamic websites are more complex. Technically, from a user standpoint, they can be a lot easier. For instance, imagine maintaining a blog where every time you add a new blog post, you had to create a new HTML file for that post, copy and paste, the boilerplate HTML, go in and add your content. And then you have to go in and update all your pages to add that new blog post to the main blog feed. You have to update any of your sidebars that have blog posts. It'd be a lot of manual work, right? It's simpler to understand, but it's a lot more work to maintain stuff and add new content. So, content management system is a lot more complex, but from a user standpoint, it's easier. It's kind of like a car. Cars are pretty complex if you get into the engine and try to figure out how they work, but most people don't do that. They just need to learn how to drive it, right? So what we're going to talk about in this video is kind of how WordPress works, sort of under the hood, and kind of how it compares to a static website. Because when I first got into WordPress, I hated it because I came from that static background. I didn't understand where the files were. I didn't understand how a database worked. I would create a new page in my WordPress website, and then I would go in and try to find that HTML file, and I couldn't find it, and that drove me nuts. And I almost gave up on WordPress because of that. So hopefully you won't give up on WordPress. Hopefully this video will inspire you to continue working with it. So the main thing you need to understand about WordPress is most of your content actually isn't being stored in a file. It's not being stored in an HTML file or a PHP file. The vast majority of your content is being stored in a database. And then there are PHP files that will reference that database and pull data out of it and display it on the front end for you. If you've ever noticed, if you go to a website and you right click and hit view source, you'll see a whole bunch of code. But if you look at the index.php file or WordPress website, there's like 5 lines of code and that's it. And you're wondering, how is it that these 5 lines of code are turning into hundreds, if not thousands of lines of code, on the front end? And we're going to talk about that because it's pulling a bunch of data from the database. So where do we start? So with WordPress, you need a theme, and a theme technically only has to have 2 files in it. It needs to have an index.php file, and it needs to have a style.css file. And that's technically all that you really need to have a theme. Of course, themes have many more files than that, but that's all that's required. So if we take a look at a brand new WordPress install, my keyboard will work. There we go. Oh, come on, you can do it. There we go. So this is a fresh install of WordPress right over here. I haven't done anything to it. Haven't added any content or anything. I just installed WordPress, and it looks like this. This is WordPress's new 2022 theme. So you'll notice that there are 3 folders, and then there's a handful of PHP files here. And when you're building your website, you never touch any of these files, okay? Occasionally, somebody might ask you to add something to the WP config file, but for the most part, no. You're not going to touch any of these files. The only files that change are in your WP content folder, and this is where your plugins and your themes live, and your uploads. When you upload an image or a video in the WordPress dashboard, they end up in here in the uploads folder. So, we're not really going to look at plugins, and we're not going to look at uploads today. We're going to be mainly looking at the themes. And so there's 3 themes in here. The one that we're using right now is 2022. So if we open that folder up, you'll see we have an index.php file and we have a style.css file. Like I said, those are required for it to be an actual theme, but there's more. We have a functions.php, which is very common. There's a templates folder, which is pretty common. Some theme developers just dump all these pages, kind of in the root. Sometimes they put them in a folder. There's an assets folder, again, pretty common. That's where we load things like fonts and some theme specific images. So what we want to look at is, first, if you do a Google search for WordPress template hierarchy, you'll get this page. And what we really want to look at is this image right here. Now this looks a little overwhelming, but don't close the video. Let me just explain this real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to start over here on the far left-hand side. And so these gray boxes are things that you would see in your WordPress dashboard or on the front end of a website. So, a singular page, that would be, like the sample page right here. This is a singular page. I don't know if there's any default. Yeah, there's one default blog post. So this would be a single post page. So, yep, single post page right here. There's archive page. An archive page in WordPress is basically a list of pages or posts. So if we go back to the home page, there's only one post here. But if this was a active blog and there was a bunch of blog posts, you'd see a whole bunch of blog posts on this page, right? This would be an archive page, okay? And WordPress archive just basically means a list of posts or pages. And basically, if you go all the way up to the right side of this diagram, you see some actual files, some PHP files, okay? And so what all this stuff means, basically, is if you create a page, let's start over here on the far left. If you create a page, okay, it's either a regular page, like the sample page, or it's a post, right? Like a blog post. So if it's a single page, and let's say it's a static page, basically, if we follow this line all the way over here, it's going to look for a file called page.php. If you have a page.php file in your WordPress installation in that theme folder, then it will use that page to display this content. If you don't have a page.php file, it's going to say, okay, we're going to look for a singular.php file. If you have one of those, it will use that to display the content. If you don't have that, it will default to the index.php. Now, everything defaults to the index.php. That's why I said it's required to have an index.php and a style.css are required to have in a theme. These other pages here are optional. But if all you have is an index.php, then literally every piece of content on your website is going to look exactly the same because they're all using the same template file to display the content. Okay, so if we look at our 2022 theme, there's not a lot going on in there. We do have our index.php file. You can see there's not much going on in there. We do have a functions PHP file, and we have templates, and we have parts. We have an includes with a whole bunch of stuff going on in here. So what I'd like to do is probably let's look at 2020. Okay, 2020 is a little more sort of normal in terms of themes. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come over here and we're going to switch to that theme because their new 2022 theme is a little more complicated than their typical theme, probably because it has support for the new full page editor. I'm definitely not going to get into. I could talk all day about how much I hate Gutenberg, but I'm not going to. We're going to press on. Let's activate 2020 theme. Go back to VS Code. So in the 2020 theme, you'll see we have our index.php file, of course. This has a little more code than the last one did. But we also have a header.php file. We have a footer.php file. We have a singular. Remember, we just talked about the singular right over here, singular.php. So that's the template file that's going to display content for single pages and posts, because it doesn't look like they had, they didn't have a single.php. They just have the singular.php. And we don't have a page.php. So we don't have, it doesn't look like there's an archive.php in here either. So like I said, this is a pretty basic theme. Some themes that you install, you're gonna have all these and more. All right, and there's all sorts of complicated stuff in the middle that we're not really going to go over because I just kind of want to get you to understand how WordPress works. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to prove that this file system is working here. So if we go to the singular.php, we're not gonna go into how PHP works, but basically just know that what this code is doing is it's looking for posts in the database. And if it's finding some posts in the database, it's going to display those posts on the front or on the page here. And it's going to use this template parts content to display. So you can see there's more information here about it. It basically just, they like to split things up into a bunch of different template parts, which sounds more complicated at first, but it's actually easier in the end to, if you just want to customize one part of the overall look. But all you really need to know is what's going on is it's using this, where did it go? Singular.php file to display the posts. And then you can see this, it's using the header.php file to display the header content. It's using the footer.php file to display the footer content. Everything in the middle is coming from this code, which is pulling the posts from the database and displaying it. And so what I'm going to do is right here, I'm just going to put a little H1 that says singular.php because that's the file that we're looking at. I'm going to save it. And then if we go back to our website here and pull up the sample page, you see it says singular.php up here because it's using the singular.php template file. The post is also using that same template file. So for this particular theme, basically posts and pages are going to look the same with a few minor differences because they put some if statements in the code. So basically it's saying if this is a post, show some metadata here. If it's a page, don't show that data. But for the most part, you'll notice the structure is the same. We got this white banner here with the title on the post as well as the page. and then below that we have the content, right? It's the same structure because they're both using that same file, that singular.php file. Okay, so if we look at our template hierarchy, it's using the singular PHP because it didn't find a single .php, right? Um, and so if we come up here and we follow this line and we say single post, right? So that's like a blog post, and that follows these lines depending on what kind of post it is, and it's going to look for a single .php. And if it's a static page, we follow that line, it's looking for a page.php. But we don't have either one of those files, so it's defaulting to the singular.php file, okay? And that's why they both basically look the same, because they're both using the singular.php file. And if we were to go, and I'm just going to rename this. Now we go back and look at our website. That singular.php heading went away because now the singular.php file doesn't exist. And so now it's defaulting to, now it's defaulting to index.php because we effectively removed singular.php from the equation. Okay. Similarly, if we put this back the way it was, I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all this code. I'm going to create a new file called single.php. I'm going to create another one called page.php. And I'm going to use the same exact code for both of these, except I am going to change this header that I made. So this one is a single.php. So I'm going to call it single.php in the heading. And page.php, I'm going to change that heading to page.php. Okay. Now if we go back to our website and we refresh, you see it says page.php up here for the sample page. And if we pull up a blog post, now it says single.php. Now they both still look the same because I just copy and pasted that code, right? But this shows you that now, because it found a page.php file, it's now using that to display the content for pages instead of defaulting to the singular.php file. And because it found a single.php file, it's using that to display the content for the posts. So that's how you can get different layouts when you're viewing a post versus a page. And if you look at the files, right, not much code in here for the page.php file, right? There's 34 lines of code. If we look at the actual front end of the website and we go to that sample page, right click, view page source, there's a whole bunch of code, right? Because it's basically PHP is a server-side language. So the server is reading this code and it's going, first of all, it's going to the header.php file. And there's a lot more code in here. It's taking all this code and dumping it right here at the top of our page.php file. And this bit of code is grabbing our footer.php. It's grabbing all this code and it's dumping it at the bottom of our page.php. And then all this stuff in the middle is coming from the database, basically. It's pulling more HTML from this template parts / content, but it's pulling the data from the database. So, you know, this heading is in the database. This content is in the database, you know, and then the PHP is pulling this data from the database and dropping it into the front end. So that's, you know, that's where all this code is coming from, right? So if you're like me and you've created a page in WordPress and then you've gone in and tried to find it, you know, it's not in here. That page called sample page, it's not in here, right? The blog post called whatever, hello world, you're not going to find that. You know, you're not going to find hello world.html or .php anywhere in here. That's all in the database, okay? And then these files are just pulling from that database and then displaying the content based on what we have going on in here. So I hope that's helpful. Again, there's more template files that you can have. I don't think did we have a home? Does this one have a home.php? Nope. So it looks like, let's go to the home page and see what template it's using. Oh, so because if we go into the dashboard, we have the option set to the main page is just the blog. But if we go static page, let's make a page, call it home, and publish that. And then we go back into our settings and make that page called home our home page. Right here, static page, home page, home. Now let's go see what that looks like. So it's using page.php because if we go up to the left here, site front page, okay, and we follow the line, it's looking for a home.php. Actually, since it is, let's see here, page shown on front, so it goes up to this line, and we follow this line over, it's looking for a page.php, okay? And so we have one, so that's what it's using. Now we could have a front-page.php, and it would use that. So if we go front-page.php, again, I'm just going to grab all of this code, same code, and just paste it in. And I'm going to change this to front page.php. Now it's using the front page PHP template file for the home page instead of that page.php file, okay? Because we created it. And if this goes away, then it'll once again default to the page.php. And if we took the page.php file away, it would default to singular.php. And if we took that away, it would default all the way back to index. Everything you can see here, everything will default back to index.php, which looks like this. So there is stuff there. So if everything does default to the index.php file, the website won't break too much. Let's just go ahead and delete front page. Let's delete page.php. And I'll even delete singular. And if we go to the home page, now it's using the index page. And I'll go ahead and just to further prove it, I'll go ahead and add our heading here. I could learn how to type index.php. Save that. There it is. So again, it's a little more complicated than that. If you look at this image, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in here. You can also, I've seen people, you could just have an index.php file, and you could have basically a bunch of if statements in here that says, if it's a blog post, then use this HTML to display the content. If it's a regular page, use this HTML to display the content. That works, but it's just not the smartest way to do it. It's better to break things up into different files, follow the WordPress standards, and it's just easier for future developers to jump in and figure out what's going on. It's also just easier to find the code. If you want to edit the way that posts look, you open single.php. You don't open index.php and scroll through thousands of lines of code to find where the post code is, right? So and some themes do kind of a mix of both. They use the template system, but sometimes they throw in some if statements in there to display content, a little bit differently based on what's going on. So, but for the most part, if you're gonna, dabble with WordPress, you can pull this up, and this will help you kind of figure out. There's plugins that will also, you can install a plugin in WordPress, and it will display at the top of the page what template is being used to display that content, which is really helpful when you're trying to jump into a fresh theme that you didn't develop yourself, but you're trying to make some customizations to it. And you're like, okay, so which file should I customize? It's good to at least have the purple parts here kind of memorized. So, if it's an archive page, there's an archive.php. Single pages, there's single page and page, home. You can even create your own 404 page. So if someone tries to access the page on your website that doesn't exist, you can customize the 404 page. And then there's search, which is kind of like an archive, but it's a special kind of archive. It displays, the results of a search, of course. You can even control that, what your search results page looks like. So definitely a good idea to at least have the purple parts over here memorized, so you just kind of know what file to look for. And then, you can learn some of this more complex stuff in the middle as you go on. This is a very overwhelming looking graphic, but for the most part, you can kind of block out all this stuff in the middle and just follow the lines over here, single page, follow the line and figure out which template file you should be looking at. That's all I got today, I think. I hope you found that useful. Let me know if you have any questions about any of that. I'd be happy to try and tackle those in the comments, wherever you're at, YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.